This next interview in our donor-to-donor series of interviews with transplant industry experts features Dr. Matthew Cooper, the Director of Kidney and Pancreas Transplantation at the MedStar Georgetown Transplant Institute. Dr. Cooper has been the head of the Kidney and Pancreas programs since 2012. Prior to Georgetown, Dr. Cooper was a transplant surgeon at the University of Maryland Medical System and Johns Hopkins Hospital. In addition to his work as a transplant surgeon, Dr. Cooper is a professor of surgery at Georgetown University School of Medicine. He was awarded the American Association of Kidney Patients 2020 Medal of Excellence, as well as the National Kidney Foundation's 2019 Excellence in Kidney Transplantation Award. In addition, Dr. Cooper is the president-elect of the board of directors of UNOS, the United Network for Organ Sharing. Dr. Cooper, thank you for making the time for this interview.
Thanks for having me, Ned. It's a pleasure to be here.
We have two areas we'd like to ask you about. The first is UNOS, and the second is the Advanced Donation Program, also known as the Voucher Program. But before we get into those areas, please give us a sense of what the past months have been like for you and your team as you've adjusted to transplant in the midst of a pandemic.
Yeah, thanks for the question, Ned. So the pandemic certainly has made transplantation a challenge, but now coming out the other end of this, at least in my area of Washington, D.C., it's really demonstrated sort of a remarkable collaboration amongst the professionals in the donation and the transplant space, demonstration and improvements of communication and in providing safety for our patients and their families. I'm really proud to say that our transplant program had continued to do transplants throughout the pandemic, particularly through the months of March through June. So I give my health system, MedStar, and our hospital, Georgetown, a lot of credit to provide the safety mechanisms to allow us to do this, to provide opportunities for rapid testing. We performed in the 4 months about 110 transplants, including a number of living donor transplants as well, which was, again, required a lot of support, a lot of fortitude, looking always at the risk benefit, because what we knew for sure was, despite the pandemic, people still were unfortunately going to die from their end-stage organ disease. And so we consistently had to look for the risk benefit of transplantation versus not. And I think with resources being at our disposal and safety being a priority, we were still able to continue to do transplants. And what I think is a real something to be excited about in the transplant system was we still found a way for organs that were donated through families who were still having to make some of the most difficult decisions of their life to donate their organs on behalf of a loved one. If they were unable to be transplanted locally, we found a way, UNOS and the transplant community found a way to get those organs to programs that could transplant them so that no organ was wasted. So while there was a decrease in donors, not necessarily because we weren't working to find them, some of that was because of the change of practice and lacks of accidents and such, still the organs that were donated were transplanted. And so I think that's really a piece that we have to be proud. We really have to celebrate. The transplant still happened during the pandemic and people still benefited.
Great. You've recently become president-elect of UNOS. I think most of us non-medical folks who have had reason to get involved in transplant have heard something about UNOS, the United Network for Organ Sharing. But for many of us, it is just another quasi-government acronym. Please give us a little history of UNOS and what is its role in transplant and what is your role as president?
Mm-hmm. So as we know, transplant has been occurring for well over 60 years. But when it first started, it was a little kind of a local practice. Local donors, local transplant programs would find a way to make sure that those organs were transplanted. But as transplant got bigger and bigger, there was an appreciation that there needed to be more oversight, more I hate to use the word regulations, but assured that there was a respect for that gift of life, and they were sure that every American had equal opportunity to organ donation and transplants. And so UNOS is a private organization. It really began out of something in Virginia, the Southeastern Organ Procurement Foundation, that eventually grew now to being a national organization. It's a private company that has bid for the contract that is overseen by the Health and Human Services Organization. And UNOS oversees what is called the Organ Procurement and Transplant Network, which is how transplant, the governing system for transplant. It has its own board of directors. Everybody is encouraged to participate, including donor families and recipients, because really UNOS's purpose is to assure that we maintain the public trust, that there's transparency about how decisions are made, and that everybody has the ability to participate in those decisions. And as you said, I'm honored to have been chosen the president-elect for UNOS. I'm in that year now. Come July, I will become the president of the board of directors. My job, I believe, is to make sure that we are inclusive as possible, to assure that we have as much diversity and that we have every voice represented on that board of directors, and that we continue to always find ways to do things better. If we ever get to a point where every patient has an organ readily available, or every patient has an organ for the rest of their life, then we're in a different story. But right now, we have to always think that we can find a better way to find more organs and do more transplants.
I know this is a question that every potential donor asks himself or herself. If a living donor donates a kidney and at any time in the future, something happens that results in the failure of the remaining kidney, is that donor protected in any way to receive a kidney transplant?
It's a very important question, and one I'm glad we talk about all the time, because we never want a living donor to think that we aren't working to protect them. And so the answer is yes. The way that organs are allocated, there's a number of for different priorities, and you can imagine that the top of some of those priorities, not surprisingly, children, people that are highly sensitized, and living donors are at the top of that list, because we certainly recognize, anybody that's been so altruistic and so kind to have donated an organ, we would never want them to be anywhere but the top of that list. And so, yes, the allocation system demands that previous living donors. Now, fortunately, it doesn't happen very often, and we hope it would never happen. But if it does, organ donors should feel confident and comfortable that they will be prioritized for a deceased donor on the match runs.
Thank you. We recently interviewed Garrett Hill, the CEO of the National Kidney Registry, and I'd like to focus on a specific feature which is becoming more widely accepted in kidney transplant as its versatility is becoming more appreciated: the Advanced Donation Program, otherwise known as the Voucher Program. Will you please give us some background on both Georgetown's and your relationship with the National Kidney Registry?
I think the National Kidney Registry is just a tremendous story. Garrett, I'm sure, told you his personal story, and his success has led to the nation's benefit in terms of living donation and paired kidney exchange. It just allows for the removal of another barrier for living donor transplant. And the reason I say that is there is about a 35 to 40% chance that any individual that comes with a potential recipient who needs a transplant will be incompatible. I try not to use the word match, because unfortunately that has the perception that in order to be a donor, it's almost an impossibility, a 1 in a million. That chance, albeit not 1 in a million, is also not zero. And if we were to think that because people are incompatible, typically through blood types, that they couldn't donate at all, is when you think about it now, a little bit short-sighted. The other reason why people are unable to donate directly is because they would develop antibodies or sensitized. And we have those pairs that exist and have existed all around the country. And what the paired exchange program through the NKR allows us to do is to find those pairs, those donors, to match to other recipients somewhere else in the country. Sometimes it's right down the street, to allow for living donation to happen in the absence of additional techniques that will give people that gift of life that we see through living donation. And it has allowed for well over 1,000 new transplants every year that otherwise might not have happened. And so we're a big believer in the National Kidney Registry. We do about 110 kidneys a year, and our last calendar year, over half of those were for paired kidney exchange. And we even encourage compatible pairs that could donate directly to each other to also think about participation in paired exchange to, again, provide others that gift of life that they might otherwise not have.
Great. The voucher program is useful in a variety of circumstances. Can you explain how it works and who may benefit from its use?
Yeah, the voucher program is very interesting. And one of the things that we have recognized for a while now is that we have to continue to find ways to remove the disincentives for why people cannot donate. And financials are one of those things, but there are other reasons why people may not be able to donate. And one sort of simple thing is time. And let's use for an example, a grandfather who wishes to donate to his grandson. The donor, the voucher program has sort of two pieces to it, a standard voucher and a family voucher. And if we look at that example, the grandson who we maybe know has some kidney disease, but at the current time is not in need of a kidney transplant, and a grandfather who would like to be assured that his grandson has a kidney when he or she needs one, it's a granddaughter, he donates now, and that individual has this voucher assigned to them. It's more than just a piece of paper. They are identified by their DNA, by their blood type, and so this is not transferable to anybody. This is specifically for this individual. And when it comes time that child grows up and the time for their transplant is now, they go to the top of the run list to be able to receive a living donor transplant. That's the standard voucher. Somebody donates specifically for one recipient. The family voucher is yet another effort to remove a disincentive, and I use myself as an example. If I was interested in being a living donor, what I've known in the past is I'm blessed to have a wife of 27 years, 3 healthy children, and my worry is if I was to donate today and for whatever reason in the future, one of my family members ever needed a transplant, I would be unable to do so. The family voucher now says that I can identify up to 5 healthy people in my family that if for whatever reason in the future they go on to develop a kidney problem and need a kidney transplant, they then go to the top of the list to receive a living donation. So it's amazing to me. We'll probably look back 10 years from now and go, I don't know what took us so long to think about this, because it really is an amazing thing to remove disincentives, to bring more people forward, to get more people transplanted.
That's interesting. When I donated, they did not have the family voucher program, and it would have been a great use in my case, because one of my family members was quite concerned about what would happen if she needed a kidney at some point in the future. One aspect of this, as I understand it, is that the kidney you would get with the family voucher program, should you ever need it, is probably a better match than the one you'd get from that one individual.
We try, that NKR tries to do that. Again, there's a lot of things that we can, quote, match donors and recipients with, and age and DNA and function of the kidney. And so that's why, as I say, we even try and encourage everybody to consider paired kidney exchange, because now as we've gotten more and more sensitive techniques, particularly in identifying genetic matches, we may find that people who are compatible can be made better compatible with pairs through the paired kidney exchange.
Wonderful. So donor to donor has facilitated a number of transplants using the voucher program. Perhaps the most dramatic case for us was a woman by the name of Betsy Snow, who donated to start a chain and gave a voucher to a woman, Danielle, who was 99.97% sensitized. In other words, only 3 in 10,000 potential donors would be a possible match. If Danielle had been forced to wait for a donor to show up at the center where she was registered for an internal exchange, there is almost no chance she would have ever found a donor. But because all the donors from some 95 centers affiliated with the National Kidney Registry are pooled in the search, Danielle received a kidney transplant 12 weeks after Betsy gave her a voucher. In your experience, is this result consistent with the voucher recipients you've seen?
Yeah, absolutely, Ned. I think that is really the way the voucher is expected to benefit, because the challenge we have with a highly sensitized patient like Betsy is that people who are looking to receive a living donor transplant, a compatible living donor transplant, we often need to find a donor that's a much further distance from sort of where our local recipient might exist, because they are, quote, they're sensitized because of local interactions from local blood transfusions or through previous transplants. And so our experience has been Georgetown on the East Coast. A lot of our donor matches actually come from all the way from the West Coast, from California, Washington, Oregon State, and it's made, again, what we think is almost an impossibility, that 3 in 10,000 become a true reality. There are very few patients, in my experience, and I think in the experience of the National Kidney Registry, who have been unable to find a compatible match. And I think, there are lots of stories. We have several personal stories of individuals who, without, the paired kidney exchange program, without the National Kidney Registry, they wouldn't receive the gift of life through paired kidney exchange. It's really remarkable to see what is able to be accomplished.
I just want to make sure I heard you correctly, because you've said something that I had not heard before. Is there a local or a regional sensitization issue that we should know about?
Yeah, it's interesting. So you think about what typically causes people to become sensitized. The most common events: blood transfusions, transplants, and pregnancies. Those are typically local phenomenons. People receive a blood transfusion from a local donor. They receive a kidney primarily from a local donor. Their pregnancy sensitization from the husband is a local gene pool. And so when we're trying to find someone to be a donor for that recipient who's been sensitized, we need to get out of local, because that's where their sensitization came from. And they need to go from a much further distance. And that's why a national paired exchange program has always been demonstrated to be more successful than a single center registry program or even a regional program, because you've increased the numbers of opportunities of finding that sort of, finding that individual who is going to be that a matched donor for them. And so that's why having a national program has been so successful.
That is fascinating. Maybe that explains why my kidney went from Manhattan to Colorado. Very interesting.
It's made transplant a much smaller world, that's for sure.
So before we sign off, Dr. Cooper, is there anything else you would like to share with our viewers?
I would, Ned. Thank you for this. I think what's important, and I hope viewers who hear this recognize, and the reason why I stay away from the word matching is that if people are truly interested in being a living donor, there is someone out there who could benefit from their gift of life through a national program, through something like the National Kidney Registry, our own living donor program at MedStar Georgetown. It's a relatively simple process, but important to appreciate that there are many people out there who are just sort of waiting for your gift. And I hope people will take up this opportunity. And I can promise you, and having done this now for 20 years, speaking to people who have donated an organ and going back and asking them would they do it again, across the board, they'll tell you it was probably the most rewarding and moving experience of their lifetime.
Well, I can second that. It was certainly the most rewarding experience of my lifetime. Well, Dr. Cooper, thank you so much for your time. We really appreciate it. And we appreciate your commitment to transplant.
Thanks for the opportunity, Dan.